Hello.
Hi.
Hey, how are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you two?
Doing well.
We're doing well. So it's 9 a.m. here. We're just getting ready to start the day. You're on the complete opposite side of the world from us. You're getting ready to go to bed, I guess?
Yeah, I've been out for drinks with friends, and I've just trotted back. And
it all started with a Skype call last summer between my brother and me and our friend Rosi. We'd met her the previous year while traveling in Cuba. After our guide got drunk and abandoned our tour group one evening, we all kind of bonded and became good friends. We returned home but kept in touch, and several months later she dropped us a line.
How's the Australian winter going?
Oh, it's actually...
Rosi told us about an 11,000-mile road trip she was planning for this summer with her best friend Jane as part of an annual charity event called the Mongol Rally. Basically, the two of them were thinking of spending a couple of months driving across Europe and Asia, a quarter of the way around the Earth, and they wanted to know if we wanted to join them.
So, what do you think? Should we keep engaging in chit-chat to heighten the suspense, or do you want me to cut to the chase?
No, I am dying to know. What have you decided to do?
So you messaged us the other day. You said you have your fingers and toes crossed for the good news?
Yeah.
Well, so I guess it's been a few weeks since we last spoke, and Drew and I kind of...
Stop.
Yep. What?
I'm so glad you can't see me You can't see me, can you? I am sitting here. Just go on, tell me, what have you decided?
Well, we talked things over. We read through the rally contract you sent us and all the stuff on their website. We've decided we're going to do it.
Oh, boy!
I'm Scott Gurian. I've worked in public radio for many years, most recently at WNYC, where I reported on New Jersey's long-term recovery from Superstorm Sandy. I liked my job, but eventually I was ready for a change. I've always loved traveling, experiencing new cultures, and stepping outside of my comfort zone, so when this opportunity came my way, it was hard to resist. I've decided to start a new podcast called Far From Home to document my adventures, and over the next 24 or so episodes, you'll get a sampling of just what it takes to plan a journey from London to Mongolia in a tiny little hatchback. And as I'm producing this, I'm still in the middle of everything, so I have no idea how it will end. Over the past 9 months, my brother and I have been finalizing our route, getting our vaccinations, and shuffling between foreign consulates to apply for visas, so you'll get to hear some of the many challenges we've had to tackle to make this trip a reality.
How are you going to maintain your vegetarianism?
Yeah, Mongolia I think is going to be a little tricky.
You're going to be eating mutton everywhere.
Well, okay, so what if you don't get the visa?
Actually, then it becomes really complicated because I'd have to detour up through Azerbaijan, but they might not let me in because I have an Armenian last name, and Azerbaijan apparently doesn't like Armenia. We'll have to learn to drive stick shift, figure out what to pack, and calm the nerves of worried loved ones.
Alan was beside himself when I said that you might be coming. He is the best husband. He is so great because he's married to an absolute lunatic. And he's been so good over this because I know that he'd really rather I wasn't doing it because he's slightly anxious. But when I said that you two may be coming as well, he just said, oh, that's good. I can relax about the whole thing now.
Little does he know that we know absolutely nothing about fixing cars.
When you tell someone you're driving across 19 countries through a part of the world that most people need to look up on a map, you're bound to get a wide variety of reactions. Before folks start to worry for your safety and your sanity, there's the initial excitement.
That sounds really interesting.
That sounds wonderful.
That sounds awesome. I'd love that.
Lots of people are curious to know more.
You always read about people who do the Appalachian Trail or people who... I biked across America, but this is something I've never heard of, and it seems like it's even taking that to an even bigger extreme.
And, of course, you'll be peppered with all sorts of questions.
Can you drive from London to Mongolia?
How long does that take?
What kind of car?
If you're listening to this podcast and hearing about all this for the first time, I'm guessing you probably have a ton of questions as well, and I promise I'll try to get to most of them later in this episode or in the coming weeks. But first, let's go back to the very beginning.
I was there at the start, but Tom would be very upset if you called me a co-founder, I think. I'm more of a passenger, really.
Meet Jules Ingram. Back in 2002, he and his friend Tom Morgan were still in school and headed to an exchange program in the Czech Republic.
On the way out, we were in the airport, and Tom bought Jack Kerouac's On the Road. And I think that's probably when the seeds of genius were sown. We were art students for our sins. And being art students, we had a lot of free time on our hands. We thought it would be a good idea to get a car at first because we wanted to go snowboarding. So we had our snowboards and we drove to the mountains. But as the student exchange kind of progressed, the winter finished, so we had to think of something else to do. We were kind of a bit bored and wanted to do something a bit silly. So we thought it would be a good idea to drive to the furthest away place that no one we knew had ever been, which happened to be Mongolia, basically. We came up with the idea kind of over a few beers, and between the first beer and the third beer, it turned from a thought into a plan. Generally seems to be the best way of deciding to do something is in the pub. So we basically set off one day with a couple of cigars and a camping knife and not much else. We didn't get very far because we got to the Turkish-Iranian border and got turned away because we didn't have the right visas. But we still had a really good trip.
Jules and Tom returned home, but the travel bug had bitten them hard, so Tom started spreading the word to all their friends to get them to come along and attempt the journey again. Things took off from there, with hundreds of teams now participating in the Mongol Rally each year, and a group called the Adventurists loosely organizing it.
We try not to have too many rules. The most important one is that you have to have a small shit car, and the next rule is that you're on your own. You don't need anyone else to support you. It's to encourage people to push the envelope, get outside their comfort zone and, throw themselves headlong into the unknown so the unpredictable can happen. It's no fun if it's too easy. You could drive a Land Rover from the UK without any trouble at all. And if you don't have any trouble, you don't test yourself, you don't experience any hardships to make the finish line more glorious, but also you don't interact with anyone. If you break down a lot, then you tend to find you get helped a lot by locals. And if you're in a really crap car, people tend to relate to you a lot better than if you're in a massive, expensive looking 4x4. You're definitely going to make more friends along the way, I would say.
The third rule is that you have to raise at least £1,000 or about $1,400 for charity. I'll come back to that in a future episode, but let's return to Rosie and how she found out about the rally through a chance encounter with a woman she met.
We were in a Chinese restaurant having a meal, and it was Alan who met her first of all and who was trying to have a conversation with her. And she said, I'm not a very interesting person, but I do enjoy travelling. And by the way, I did this thing. And Alan said, you've got to listen to this. You've got to hear what this lady's saying. And she did it with her daughter. And she started to tell me about it. And I just immediately said, I have to do this. And he said, well, I'm not going to do it. And I said, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. My friend Jane will do it. And he said, not sure. And I said, she definitely will do it. And I was right and he was wrong.
You just kind of signed your friend Jane up?
Yeah.
You know her that well? You knew she'd be into this?
No, I actually wasn't quite that cruel. I primed her for it. I sent her a series of text messages because she's in England, right? So there was a time difference. So as soon as I got back from having met this woman, I then went online, looked it up, and all that did was actually reinforced what I wanted to do. And so I started bombing Jane with WhatsApp messages throughout the night to say, when you wake up, you've got to call me. You've got to call me. We've got to speak. We've got to Skype. And I kind of at one point got a message which said, piss off, I'm asleep. So I actually woke her up and I said, but it's big. It's really big. I've got this really big thing that I've got to tell you about. It's huge. It's ginormous. It's humongous. And anyway, as soon as she woke up, we spoke. She was on straight away. She was absolutely on board almost before I'd finished telling her about it. I think it's because we've been friends for over 35 years. We knew that we would do something big together one day, but we just hadn't thought about it. We hadn't even really talked about it, but this is it. This is the thing.
After Rosi emailed me last August to ask if I'd be interested in joining her, I reached out to my brother, and like Jane, he was immediately on board. You see, ever since Drew and I were young, we've both loved traveling and had a desire to seek out new places and experiences. After our mom and grandmother died a few years ago, we didn't have a lot of close family left in the area, so we made a habit of taking a big international trip every Christmas and New Year's. So far, we've gone to Thailand and Cambodia, Ecuador and the Galapagos Islands, and that trip to Cuba where we first met Rosi. For me, it's not just about thrill-seeking and having fun. Like I said, I've worked for many years as a radio and print journalist, and when you're in that profession, you have a natural curiosity about the world, a desire to seek out the people and places whose voices and stories are rarely heard, and put yourself in their shoes to try to understand what it's like. On top of that, I've just always loved geography. I mean, as a kid, back in middle school, that was, I think, my favorite subject, where we got to draw maps. And this part of the world that we'd be traveling through across a handful of former Soviet republics in Central Asia was, until recently, a huge black hole in my geographic knowledge. I didn't really know anything at all about it, and it's just not really a region that I ever had any plans to go to. So this seemed like the perfect opportunity. On the eve of the early registration deadline, I went to the Adventurists website, entered my info, and clicked submit. Seconds later, a confirmation message appeared on my screen, congratulating me on making the best and the least sensible choice I've ever made.
Have you agreed on a team name?
That was the first question we were asked, and we had to come up with something. Rosi and Jane decided to call themselves Team Sugar and Spice after the nicknames they gave each other. There was also Five Fools No Mechanic, Lock, Stock, and One Smoking Gasket, and Team Worst Case Ontario. Then there were the ones with Central Asian-themed puns in their titles, like the Yurt Lockers, Batar Late Than Never, a reference to Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia, and also Big Fat Yak Attack, Yak Yak Goose, and the Megalomaniacs. You've seen a trend here? So, yeah, it was our turn. And I figured if we're looking for cheesy puns, what better place to turn for inspiration than the world of public radio, and more specifically, Prairie Home Companion.
We're back with more of our show right after this special news bulletin.
A nation in crisis looks inward.
This is Linda Wertheimer, NPR News in Washington, with a special report from the Middle East. With me on the line from the mountain province of Donandistan, from the provincial capital of Rilibad, is correspondent John Notright.
So tell me what you think of this. I was trying to come up with something clever, though Drew's not wild about this, but I decided, at least for now, to call us Team Donandistan.
I think it's a pretty good name, actually, the more I think about it.
Now that was out of the way, it was time to begin the planning process. And you might not realize this, but the long list of tasks you have to complete just to prepare for a journey like this could often seem almost as challenging as the drive itself. So let's start with figuring out the route. And before we go any further, I should correct a misperception some of you, like my friend Travis, might have about how this all works.
All I can think of is like Muttley and like all the old Hanna-Barbera cartoons on their like crazy race. Do you remember that?
What dastardly crime are you up to now, Dick Dastardly?
A foolproof way to win this wacky race. That's what.
That would be kind of awesome, but no, this isn't a race, and there aren't really any winners or losers. Given the challenges of this journey, the goal is simply to make it to the end, even if your car breaks down halfway there and you end up having to hitchhike the rest of the way. The second point I should explain is that while there are a few hundred teams that drive the Mongol Rally each year, they don't necessarily do it together. In other words, there's a start point and an end point, and you're welcome to caravan with your friends, like my brother and I will be doing with Jane and Rosi, who will be driving in a separate car. But there's not a certain designated route that everyone follows. You're free to choose whichever way you'd like. And sure, you could just drive on highways straight across Europe and Russia, making it the entire way in under 2 weeks, but what fun would that be? Last year, one team drove through Scandinavia, north of the Arctic Circle, before turning east, and another group even took a detour to Africa. Whichever way you go, says Jules Ingram, it's sure to be an eye-opening experience.
Most people have got a sort of a handle on what Europe looks like. But once you get beyond Europe, there's countries that people have got massively incorrect assumptions about, places like Iran, which a lot of British and American people are terrified of. All of our guys on the rally always say that it's the friendliest place they ever go to, and it's, the most beautiful scenery and the nicest people. Then you go to places like Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, which a lot of people have frankly never heard of. And then, Kazakhstan and Mongolia, which are so remote and unusual that you're in a situation where you're literally the first white person that someone's seen in some circumstances.
With Rosi taking the lead, we mapped out a tentative path along a southern route, similar to what many other ralliers have taken in the past. Assuming we get all the visas we need, our journey will take us on a winding trail heading southeast through Europe, then across Turkey and Iran, and finally tracing the path of the ancient Silk Road up through Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Russia, and Mongolia. And just a side note here, if you're like many Americans, you may have stopped listening just now, the moment I said Iran, because that's probably not a place most of you would ever think to go. I'll dive into this more in a future episode, but for now, just know that we've researched this carefully, and we feel pretty comfortable concluding that traveling there as a tourist is not necessarily as scary as many of us have been led to believe. Moving on, one other thing I should make clear is that we've been telling everyone we're driving to Mongolia, just because it sounds exciting and exotic, but to be more precise, the finish line this year is actually in the city of Ulan-Ude, Siberia, just north of Mongolia, so that's where we'll be ending up. As I've said, the whole trek covers a distance of nearly 11,000 miles, and we expect it to take us about 7 weeks to complete.
I guess what I've tried to do is not make the driving so onerous that that's all the trip is about. Some of my assumptions are, well, actually, we do want to stop and see these places and, smell the roses, metaphorically speaking, and not being, 1,000 kilometres a day. It depends on what your philosophy is behind this, whether it's about getting from the UK to Mongolia in the shortest time possible, to be able to say you've done the Mongol Rally, or is it actually about using that loose framework to trot around and have some adventures?
We're clearly opting for the latter, but planning a route like this is no walk in the park. Here's what it sounds like.
I made a bit of a mistake in my first draft because there's a crossing, or I thought there was a crossing, between Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. Apparently it closed in 2012 and there is no plans to open it. This is their way of trying to destabilise Tajikistan's tourism industry because Uzbekistan wants all the tourists. So they've closed what is a very usable border. But anyway, there were a couple alternatives, and so I'm taking us in on the southern road.
Are we going to have to go south on that M39 through Shahrishsab? Because otherwise it doesn't, at least on this, I'm just on Google Maps, but it doesn't look like there's really any roads through that mountain range.
We actually have to cross when we're going from Kyrgyzstan between Osh and Bishkek. We actually have to cross in and out of Uzbekistan again, so we must make sure that we've all got double entry or multi-entry visas.
I'm trying to figure out, these borders snake all together. I'm trying to figure out which country is which here. Okay, so that's Tajikistan. Well, I guess that's a little bit of Uzbekistan.
This is when we're passing through some of the most extraordinary landscape. There's about 1,500 kilometres. From what I understand, we'll be lucky if we manage to do more than 300 kilometres in a day. The roads are not brilliant. We won't be speeding along. There are lots of potholes. Sometimes the road disappears, but it's out there somewhere. Honestly, it's like a walk on the dark side when you start reading about this, because you think, we all sort of rather blithely say, oh, the world's getting so much smaller these days, haha. But in actual fact, we forget there are these massive areas of nothingness, and we're going to be bumping into some of that.
My eyes were starting to hurt from looking at all these maps, so for guidance, I turned to Sherry Ott, a travel blogger who completed the rally herself back in 2011. She basically said we should stop worrying.
I remember us trying to plan out routes. And the thing is you have to plan out a route so that you know how to fill out the visa paperwork.
Right.
But just realize it is all just a frickin' crapshoot. Like, you have no idea. I think my biggest piece of advice would be don't get set on your expectations. So for me, like, I still today, I look at my passport, I have an Uzbekistan visa that's never been stamped. Not only did it cost a decent amount of money to get that visa that was never used, but it just reminds me all the time of like, oh, that didn't go as planned. But you know what? Things don't go as planned, and it can end up even better sometimes. And I think the big thing is just, be open to where it's going to take you and be present with all the stuff that can go wrong, because you're going to look back on it and go, God damn, that was an awesome day, even though everything went bad.
Part of the reason things might not necessarily go as planned is because this part of the world could be volatile at times, and you never know what's going to happen. For example, during the Mongol rally in 2008, some participants were driving through the country of Georgia when war broke out. Thankfully, all the ralliers made it out okay. In our case, there's another area that we'll be watching closely.
We were quite keen to go down to Istanbul and spend time in Istanbul, or at least we were until last week.
This was last winter when we spoke, shortly after Turkey had shot down a Russian fighter jet for straying into Turkish airspace. And in the months that followed, there were several bombings in various parts of the country.
I mean, this is the thing with this whole damn trip, isn't it? I'm kind of figuring, look, I can't factor in, or we can't factor in every single variable at this point. There's bound to be some aspects that we're going to have to change on the way because, if Turkey is still going to be bombing Russian aeroplanes out of the sky, then that could make it all a little dodgy, and we might have to go a different way around.
So I posed the question to Jules.
There's been some discussion among participants in the Mongol Rally Facebook group about what to tell their worried friends and family members. One person said he made the mistake of telling his parents too soon, and now he gets psychological terror calls reminding him he's going to get his head cut off and he's throwing his career away. Some people's family members are concerned because, political tensions have been heating up recently in Azerbaijan. They're worried about that. Personally, I'm a little bit nervous about going through Turkey given the recent bombings there. So we're kind of taking a close look at that. I mean, what would you say to these sorts of fears, and what advice would you give to someone trying to calm the nerves of worried loved ones?
2 bits of advice I give. Firstly, have faith in the person who's going on the trip. People, by very nature of doing something like the Mongol Rally, they are generally people who go with open eyes into the world, and they know what they're letting themselves in for, and they've got a healthy appreciation of what danger is and how to avoid it. So I'd say, have faith in your son, your husband, your dad, or, wife, daughter, mother, as they're doing this, and, believe in them. And the second thing I would say is believe in people in these countries. Every Iranian is not a terrorist. Everyone in Turkey is not someone who's come across the border to kill Westerners. Everywhere you go, you will find the nicest people on earth. You will find people who break their backs to prove that they are more than the stereotypes that people hear about them. You will get people inviting you, dragging you into their homes to eat dinner with them, to go to their children's weddings, to practice their English at you with, a cup of tea as payment, just because they want to learn from you. They're not going to get the opportunities to travel, so they want to experience the world through people coming into their homes. People around the world are a lot nicer than we are at the end of the day.
Sherry Ott says she thought long and hard before she decided to sign up for the rally 5 years ago, and that helped her put things in perspective.
The moment we step out the door, we take on risk. And if we had to get up every morning and sign a waiver before we went out the door and had to read the whole thing about all the things that could go wrong that day, then we'd probably never leave and go to work. I think being here in New York or wherever in the U.S. can be just as risky every day as what we did in the Mongol Rally. It makes it a little harder because you don't understand everything all the time in the rally, but it doesn't mean that it's more dangerous because you don't understand it necessarily.
I'm not dismissing the risks at all.
Here's Rosi again.
I mean, really, with something like this, you have to think about, well, what could go wrong? Let's think about the risks and then decide how we're going to address them. So, for example, you kind of want to be able to keep an eye on each other. one of the things that I'm doing is I'm actually going to travel on my UK passport rather than my Australian passport, because Jane's British, Jane's on a UK passport, so that when we're going through the borders, there's no excuse to separate us. We've agreed that we're each going to do a basic mechanics course. We're going to also do a basic first aid course, because neither of us have got a clue about any of that stuff. I also want to learn some very basic Russian. I've got a reasonable facility with language, so I'm hoping that I can just the most basic words so that I've got something. I think, absolutely we're up for the adventure, but to go into it completely naively and without any regard whatsoever for our well-being, I don't actually think that's fair on the people who care for us. So we'll certainly be looking to cover ourselves to some degree, within reason.
Aside from your husband, Alan, I mean, how have your other friends and family reacted when you've told them you're going to do this?
Actually, it's really, really interesting. Some people have almost not engaged with me about it, to the point of, you're doing what? Right, okay. I think they just actually think it's so crazy, it's stupid. It's kind of like, well, why would you do that? What a dumb thing to do. I haven't sort of wanted to lower myself into cliche land, but, you do only have one life, and it is a great idea not to live each day the same as the last one. And, I actually do believe all of that stuff. I feel that if there's an opportunity there and you want to have a bash at it, then you've got to go for it. So it depends on whether they're sort of joking, saying you're out of your mind, or whether they're sneering, saying you're out of your mind. And if they sneer, I am getting a little bit defensive about it and saying, well, why wouldn't you do something like that? People think I'm a little bit mad anyway sometimes. So in some respects, people just think, oh, what's she doing now? Shaking their heads despondently.
Like Rosie, my brother and I can't wait to finally hit the road in mid-July, and all the months of planning we've been doing since I first recorded some of those interviews have just built up the anticipation even more. Coming up next time, we'll learn to drive stick shift, and we'll purchase a vehicle for our journey.
I've got some bad news about the car that we bought for you. It doesn't look great.
Visit my website at farfromhomepodcast.org to follow us via Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and our MailChimp newsletter. Leave a nice review in the iTunes store if you liked what you heard, and please tell a friend.
My mother, who's 84 and is in England, is sort of, oh, that's lovely, dear. I never have quite understood you. And here you go again. She just took it in her stride. It was hilarious.
Our theme music is by Cara Square and Piero Peluche. Thanks to all my friends and colleagues who gave me valuable feedback on this pilot episode. You know who you are. And special thanks to my good friends at the Public Radio Exchange, who've graciously lent their time and technical expertise to help me get this show off the ground. They also host some of my other favorite podcasts like 99% Invisible and The Memory Palace. So if you're not familiar with them, you should definitely check them out at prx.org. I'll be back in 2 weeks.
I'm just bursting with excitement. I've been watching the 2015 rally and just seeing those photographs of those places and just hearing about people's adventures. And, the amount of people who've been caught up with dodgy police and having to bribe them with bottles of vodka and chorizo. I just can't wait to get stuck into it.